Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Melanie Barham. Welcome to the Equestrian Canada Health and Welfare National Call. We are going to get started as it is 12:01. We have a number of presenters today. If you are on the line and you want to log in to see the presentations, please follow the link that was provided in the email, the invitation email. And then if you're online and you haven't logged in for the audio conference, the information is on the screen. So the first guest that I'd like to welcome, just a reminder to everybody that this call is recorded and it will be posted on our website afterwards. So if you have other people you want to share this with afterwards, you certainly can. Dr. Greer has agreed to take questions immediately following her presentation. So our first guest is Dr. Amy Greer from the University of Guelph, and she's going to be presenting on disease spread in horses and looking at some work that they have done within their group. So welcome, Dr. Greer.
So thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to be able to share some of our results of a study that some of you may have even participated in over the last couple of years. And so I'm going to start by giving you a bit of an example that you probably are familiar with, just to introduce some of the terminology that we're going to talk about later in the presentation. So if we think back to the first week of May in 2011, many of us are familiar with the cutting horse competition in Ogden, Utah, where horses came from all across North America to participate in this event in Ogden. And there were 421 horses that were housed on site. And so you can see in this figure, this represents, horses from a variety of different facilities. And within what we call network terminology, we call those facilities nodes. And so you're going to hear me say node, and what I mean is a facility that houses horses. And when those horses moved to Ogden, Utah to participate in the event, movements we refer to as edges. So these are essentially links between different nodes. So when animals travel from one node to another node, it creates an edge or a connection between those two different facilities. And so these horses formed a network where the nodes are the facilities and the edges represent movements between the facilities. And Ogden, Utah represented essentially the primary exposure of these 421 horses to an infectious pathogen. And so out of those initial 421 horses, we ended up with a number of cases of infectious disease in 10 states and provinces, including 10 horses that died or had to be euthanized as a result. And the really interesting and important thing about this network of horses as they move to an event is that the network is actually bidirectional, because when the event is over, the horses leave and go back to their home facility or perhaps go elsewhere. And so those edges have arrows on both ends. So the horses come in and then they go back out. And so in this case of Ogden, Utah, the network expands to now include 1,672 other horses. And those horses actually did not attend the event in Utah, but did have exposure to those initial 421 horses. And that resulted in 24 additional cases. And so you can see that the network in which animals move is really important from a disease transmission standpoint. And in fact, it led to the secondary exposure of 240 additional equine facilities over a short period of time. And so in order to understand the risk of disease introduction and spread, and to better inform our emergency preparedness plans within the equine industry, we really need to understand first how premises are connected to one another, so how those edges are formed over time, how connected different regions are to one another, for instance, and also we need to know something about the natural history of the pathogen of interest. And so in this Ogden, Utah case, it was neurologic equine herpes virus, but it could easily have been strangles or rhinovirus or equine influenza. And so we really need to understand how the epidemiology, the networks, and the disease dynamics interact with one another. The challenge is that for equine populations, significantly greater research effort has really been placed on clinical studies related to individual health and performance, as well as things like injury prevention. And the literature is also challenging because it's biased towards very large outbreaks. So, EHV in North America, equine influenza in Australia. But we know that there are also, lots of smaller outbreaks, little clusters of infections that happen, and those aren't represented in the peer-reviewed kind of scientific literature. The other challenging thing is that the network data is not really present, especially for non-racing horses. And so the focus of a lot of the research we've done has been to focus on bridging this gap. And so what we did was in 2015, in the absence of that network type of data, our goal was to collect prospectively information about horse movement over time in a population of Ontario horses. And the way we envisioned this happening would be that we would recruit a group of horse owners who would report to us where their horses moved on a monthly basis. And so the goal was that in each month of the study, we would be able to generate a network that had a bunch of facilities or nodes, and we would know what sorts of movements occurred between those different nodes in each month. And what we actually ended up with was 199 individual participants who reported to us on 489 horses in the province of Ontario. And we sent out these monthly surveys where individuals reported the locations they traveled to, the purpose of that travel, and what the timeline of those movements looked like. One of the things that you might wonder about, and certainly we were concerned about a little bit, was that, with a study that spans 7 months, we were concerned about a drop in participation. But in fact, our experience running this study within the equine community was really quite wonderful in that we had a response rate that exceeded 65% in every month of the study. And in fact, 44% of our study population completed all 7 months worth of questionnaires. So we really felt like the equine industry was really very interested in these sorts of research topics, and the community remained engaged across the entire 7-month study. Now, what is not surprising to us, probably, is that out of the total, more than 2,000 individual horse movements between May and November, you can see them here in this figure. We have the number of movements on the y-axis and then one kind of box representing each month of the study over time. And weekdays are in gray bars, and weekends are orange. And so certainly we see that more movement is reported in the spring, and that the movements over time decrease as we head into the fall, which is not that surprising. That's the way the equine competition season is really set up. And we also see certainly there are lots more movements that occur on weekend days rather than weekdays. And you can see the total number of movements reported in each of those months in this little N after the month. So the next thing we might be interested in is knowing, we have all of these different facilities, and in fact, we have 732 different facilities that were identified in the course of the study. And so out of those facilities, we wanted to just plot them geographically to see what sort of spatial scale we might have. And so this represents all of the facilities where horses in our study moved to or from, so where they traveled over the course of the study, and the colors represent the agricultural census regions as defined by Statistics Canada. The other thing is that the point size represents the cumulative number of facilities present in the same area. So you can see that although we have, we really have good coverage throughout southern Ontario down here, all the way really across the shore of Lake Ontario, but we also have facilities that were identified up in the Ottawa area and eastern Ontario, all the way up into the northwestern Ontario as well. And so we have actually movement essentially across the entire province. Now, the other question that we might be interested in is about movements between regions compared with movements within a region. And so what we found was that most of the movements in each of the networks remained within the same geographical region. And so I'll give you an example of this. If we look at the Ontario, so each month is represented as a circle in this figure. And so Western Ontario is kind of this orange color down here. And so this big arch of orange represents the total number of movements that were in Western Ontario. And so for horses that move to a location within the same region, that's represented by kind of the coloring in of the area here. But what we see is that there are some horses that moved from the Western region into the Central region and back during this time period. They also moved from the Western region into the Southern region as well. But for instance, there were no horses that moved from the Western region outside of Canada, so into this little green area in the month of October. And so this gives us a sense of what proportion of movements are happening within and between regions. So as I said earlier, in total, we saw that the number of facilities reported and the number of horse movements declined over the course of the study. And we were a little bit more interested in what that pattern actually looked like. And so what we want to do is then actually generate what we call network diagrams to represent these static monthly networks of horse movements. And so again, the nodes, and this is very small, but the nodes or dots represent facilities, and the lines connecting the dots represent horse movements between those two different locations or multiple locations. And I'm going to blow some of these up to kind of walk you through because it's important to recognize that the node size is related to how many horses moved in and out of there. So you can see that here some of these nodes are much larger than the others. And so those are facilities that received many more horses than the other locations. The other thing is that when I blow these up, you're going to see that the lines connecting them are color-coded. And so they're color-coded by what we called horse discipline. And so essentially we have horses that were known competition horses, and then others which were identified as more leisure or companion animal types of horses. And so we were interested in how movements might vary between those two different groups. So if we blow two of these up to take a look at them for comparison's sake, we have one here for May on the left and one for November on the right. And so you can immediately see that the networks are quite different in that, this network in May has a lot of different facilities that are represented and lots of movements, whereas the network in November is a little bit more sparse. And again, if you look closely, you'll see that some of the movements have a blue line. So this represents, here we have a little cluster where we have a facility in the middle and horses come in and out of that facility, but they're all leisure or companion animal horses. Whereas we have some areas where we have a mixture of both. So for instance, over here, we have both competition horses and leisure horses moving in and out of these facilities. We also have what we call a giant strong component. So this big gray area represents a whole bunch of facilities which are connected together as a result of movement. So it's kind of the largest set of locations that are connected through direct movement of horses. And so you can imagine that the potential outcome of, for instance, dropping an infected horse into one of these facilities would be significantly different in terms of opportunities for disease transmission than, for instance, if an infected horse with a pathogen turned up in one of these facilities, because these two facilities are disconnected from the rest of the network. So where you introduce a pathogen is important in terms of the network structure, in terms of identifying what might happen. So what we actually find is that the networks have over 88% reciprocity. And what that means is it's the proportion of movements that are reciprocal. And so return trips in the equine industry are very common. Horses go out to participate in an event or a show, and then they come back to their home facility. And in fact, those return trips or reciprocal trips are higher risk than one-way trips. And in fact, that's the reason why many livestock sectors, for instance, swine, use one-way flow of animals as a biosecurity intervention. We also see that more than 95% of the networks are what we call fragmented. And so this is the proportion of pairs of locations that are disconnected. And so the interesting thing is that fragmentation is actually protective in terms of disease dynamics, because if your network is more fragmented, the risk that you will be able to see large outbreaks is actually reduced, because the facilities are not super connected kind of over time. This was an interesting finding. The other thing that we were kind of interested in is knowing if the most dominant node was consistent over the course of the study. So is there, for instance, one specific type of facility or certain facilities out of that, 750 that consistently showed up as having lots of horses moving in and out of it? And that might help us, if that was true, around risk messaging and risk communication around emergency preparedness. What we actually found was contradictory to that, is that the most dominant node actually varies over time. And so here, this node, which is the most dominant node, has the most horses moving in and out of it at this time step, was actually a mixed-use facility in Western Ontario, whereas in comparison, in November, not unsurprisingly, the most dominant node in the November network is the Royal Winter Fair in Central Ontario. And so this is important because the nodes were different from each other. So this identifies that it might be hard to identify highly connected facilities based on their characteristics alone. So there isn't really one type of facility that defines the idea of a highly connected node throughout the study period. So what did we learn from all of this? So we documented over 2,000 horse movements over a 7-month period of time. And so these horses moved a lot, and they moved very long distances, all the way up into northwestern Ontario, all the way out into Ottawa, and all the way down to Windsor. I mean, over 700 facilities were spread across the province. Some of the nodes or facilities had edges that were both pleasure and competition horse movements, and that suggests that different disciplines or types of horses are actually more integrated than we may have previously considered, which might make, for instance, contact tracing more challenging if an outbreak were to occur. But the interesting thing is that the networks also demonstrate a high degree of fragmentation. So at the monthly level, you have lots of dyads, so just pairs of facilities that are connected, and that actually is protective. It acts to limit disease spread opportunities. What we also learned was that there's kind of no such thing as a central facility. We had really thought that there might be specific characteristics that would be common for the most highly connected facilities, but we didn't actually find that to be the case. So the most connected nodes in each month were different facilities and had different types of characteristics. So a continued focus on biosecurity at the level of individual home facilities as a first defense really remains important. Lastly, the networks change over time, again suggesting that the risk of disease transmission clearly varies depending on season and month, with an increased focus likely being important during the spring-summer months, as would be expected. So just in conclusion, history has kind of demonstrated that outbreaks have the potential to cause significant hardships for horses and owners. And certainly the equine industry has adopted a number of important biosecurity recommendations. And we really would say that our goal in terms of research is to continue to provide additional empirical evidence and data to support evidence-based protocols around emergency preparedness, specifically associated with equine events and travel. And our ongoing research program continues to build upon the current biosecurity evidence base. And so we are certainly very interested in continuing this sort of work and engaging with the equine community to do so. So I would be happy to take any questions. I'm not sure if I have to put myself back on mute or if Melanie can take me off mute to ask the question.
I think you're good. You can just stay as you are.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay, Amy? I think I'm hopefully
Okay.
off mute. Okay, so if there's anybody who does wish to ask a question, Dr. Greer is available for questions now. And then otherwise, I'll open the lines. It's *6 to unmute yourself. I'm just going to give a quick preface to our next guest, and while we're waiting for any other questions. So Dr. Andrea Osborne from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency has agreed to present to us today about an initiative that they're working on and have been working on for several years. And it's actually working and it's really an interesting one. So we invited Andrea to talk about CZ, so the Community for Emerging and Zoonotic Diseases. Christy's just pulling up her presentation now. So we thought it would be helpful for the equestrian community to know about CZ and how it works and how to become involved in it. So I'm going to open the line again for any other questions for Dr. Greer. *6 to unmute yourself if you have a question, or you can also type it into the comments box if you're online. Okay. Then Amy, I'll ask you to put yourself on mute, and then we will, and if you don't mind staying on the line in case any other last-minute questions come up at the end of the call. If not, if you have to leave, then that's totally fine.
Nope, that's fine. I'll just mute myself.
Great. And then Andrea, *6 to unmute yourself.
Great. Thank you. Can you hear me, Melanie?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to come and share some information about CZ. And so I thought I would just start on, Christy, if you can move to the next slide, number 2 there. Just a brief background. What is CZ? The Community for Emerging and Zoonotic Diseases was initiated as a project from 2013 to 2016, and it was a collaborative project across provincial governments, federal governments, industry, National Farm Animal Health and Welfare Council, the Canadian Animal Health Coalition. And that project was focused on starting to build a community and the tools to start to search for emerging and zoonotic diseases. We had an implementation phase from 2016 to 2018, and right now we're in our so-called Achieving Sustainability phase. And the Canadian Food Inspection Agency is funding the core team, which is myself and Harry Gardner and Jana Dukatsnak. And the Public Health Agency is funding the Canadian Network for Public Health Intelligence, which is the platform that we use, plus they give us IT support there. And all of our partners are funding their own members. So, for example, Melanie is an active participant in CZ, and her organization pays her salary and her time, and all of that effort. We actually added that into our budget estimates because across the country, that's actually worth a great deal of money. So why are we doing this? The goal is to create a multidisciplinary community to generate early warning of emerging and zoonotic diseases. And if you go to the next slide, please, Christy. So this is what our initial intelligence process looks like. So a disease occurs somewhere around the world, and that's reported publicly on the web. That information is detected by our computer algorithm, which is called Knowledge Integration Using Web-Based Intelligence, KIWI, on the Canadian Network for Public Intelligence platform. And one of the main things that this algorithm does is it filters out signals. There's a vast, vast amount of information being produced every day. Most of it's not relevant. And so that algorithm filters things out. Those signals that are considered potentially relevant get sent to the community members for review, and then they give it a rating of 1 to 5. Each week, the core team takes the highly rated signals and creates an intelligence report, and then those get sent out across the country for the information for everybody that's interested. And slide 4, please, Christy. The processes work. So in last fiscal year, we received over 16,000 signals, and that was filtered down by the system to just under 3,500. And then of those, after the community ratings, over that year, there were 155 of those that were considered to be relevant to Canada. And those Q signals each week, so it's 3 to 4 signals a week, are put into an intelligence report and then sent out across the country. So the next slide, the top signals that we see are across species. So whether the top rated signal was porcine epidemic diarrhea in Canada, we also had epizootic hemorrhagic disease in Ontario cervix, and invasive mosquitoes. We do have vector signals that come across, and so if there's a range extension on a vector, that pops up in our system. We had 2 signals that were on equine infectious anemia, that rated in the top 10, and some more PRRS, swine-related signals, and then leptospirosis. So one of the important things to recognize on this slide is that under source, you will see that CRE, which stands for Community Reported Event, is the most common thing here. And what that means is that a community member, or most likely our key analyst, which is Jana Dekadznak, has entered a signal into the system that hasn't been picked up yet by the algorithm. And what we find is that when the community reports the things that they think are relevant, they're relevant across the country. Next slide, please. We now also have the ability to analyze signal information over time, and that's automated now on the platform. And if you look at this chart, this is equine infectious anemia over the last 2 years. And what you see is a spike this fall. So in the previous year, I should note that just after that first sort of peak, we added additional information sources into the algorithm. So the OWEN site and EDCC were added in there, as well as a couple more sites that had more equine signals. And then this fall, when we had increased cases in Ontario, that popped up as a peak. So we can see that there is a change over time. And while these are signals in the news, they do tend to reflect the epidemic curve, and often there are a few days ahead of it. So certainly a few days ahead of confirmation. And that's what we're trying to achieve, is to get that little bit of a step ahead. We accept that we have a certain number of false positives, and occasionally something goes out that looks like something bad and then isn't. So we have to accept that. There's some uncertainty in it, but it does give people a little bit of an early warning. So the next slide, who is in our community? Our community has grown tremendously since its inception, where there was probably 50 or so people that had been part of the project phase altogether. And now we're at 257. And the next slide, please. Our membership has grown tremendously, and the blue is those members that are on the platform, and the red are those that only want to receive the intelligence report. Within the federal and provincial governments, we have a mix of veterinarians, public health specialists. We have, for example, in the federal government, we have CFIA, we have the Public Health Agency, we have Parks Canada, and Ag Canada. And in the provincial governments, we actually include a lot more public health, and as well in municipalities. We have a few municipalities that these are all public health folks. We have had increased interest in the last little while from industry, academia, and vet practitioners. And we now also have a few international members as well. So the international members don't get access to the rating tool, but they do get information about the intelligence reports and invitations to the meetings and things. So next slide, what do? We have monthly calls with our partners to discuss ongoing events and to talk about community management and arrange webinars and get direction. Our members go into the platform and rate signals. We have a series of what we call revolving raters. So people will rate signals for 1 week out of a month. And that just decreases the workload a little bit for across the community. And that's really worked. We're getting 10, 11, 12 people rating signals now each week, which has been really good. We've initiated webinars, and those have been open for public viewing. And probably our most successful one to date was last week, and it was actually on African swine fever. And we had over 200 people on the line for that call. Those calls and those webinars and our activities now qualify for continuing ed credit for veterinarians. And so that's been a bit of an incentive for some folks to join in. One of our most, I will say, popular, most successful events are ping questions, and they're just an email that gets sent out, and a signal or information source is named, and then people rate them. The folks in the community rate them. Usually, you get 25 to 35 people, and we get cross-sectoral responses. And the Eastern equine encephalitis signal that went out a few weeks ago, received 30 responses within about 2 hours, and that was across public health and animal health. And so we had a really good feedback on what was going on in Ontario, and links to the neurological information that is provided by the Ontario BioMAFRA. Next slide, please. We have 2 working groups, a reporting and analysis working group that's working on a triage process right now, so we can identify signals that need further analysis. We did our first risk profile, which is a sort of a 2.5-page document stating the current state of knowledge about, this one was about sudden acute diarrhea syndrome in pigs. And we also have planning on developing a rapid risk assessment, though we haven't had any signals that we felt have needed that yet. And we're starting right now a pilot project to enhance our weekly intelligence report. On the engagement side, we're trying to develop our trusted domestic network. Where we can, we're going to try to use network analysis to guide our development and figure out what that's going to look like, and trying to increase our engagement with existing networks across the country, because you don't know what's emerging unless you know what's normal. And so that is, it's important to connect with existing networks on public health and animal health. And so next slide, just to talk quickly about our next steps, on slide 12, where are we going? So we would like to be a true national early warning system with responsibility shared among partners, so control doesn't reside in a single organization. And that's really important in a community that there's no dictatorship. The community decides where it goes. We're going to continue to develop our virtual network to identify and create linkages across the One Health continuum. And what we really want to start to figure out is, how do we develop a trusted domestic network? How do we share those signals that are not yet in the public domain? And can we start to share the reports and analysis conducted by partners? Next slide, please. So our last sort of items we're still working on, we're still trying to refine individual roles within the community. We want people to come and go as they please, and also but take on areas that they have interest in. We're trying to tailor our communications, and we have to figure out how to send the right information to the right people, decision makers, and the general community. We're always working to improve the intelligence and figuring out how do we get more information. With our risk profile for sudden acute diarrhea syndrome, we reached out to the UK and to the US via our CFIA colleagues that often do that work. And internally, within Canada, we need to try to figure out how to make those connections as well across the provinces. We still need to revise our sustainability plan and make sure that we have stable funding going forward, but we've had great support from partners, and I think there's some real positives coming out of the development of CZ. So if you would like to find out more, then the next slide, please, Christy. If you want to find out more or to join the community, there is contact information in the slides here. You can contact the core team at our generic email, or myself, or Melanie, or any one of the folks on this list. We're also on the CAS website. If there's interest there, you can find our intelligence reports there and information on surveillance networks. And with that, I want to say thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you all today. And please feel free to contact me if you have an interest in joining CZ or finding out more.
Thank you very much, Dr. Osborne. I'd like to open the line *6 to unmute if you have any questions. Feel free to ask those. Dr. Osborne has generously offered to take any questions at this point. Okay, so our next guest is Dr. Cheryl James from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency also. Cheryl's going to be giving us our update from the Canadian Animal Health Surveillance. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Thanks, Melanie. And just to clarify, I am with the CFIA, but my job is as coordinator for this Fed Pro industry collaboration, which is CAS. So I just there is CFIA is an active participant in CAS, but this is not a CFIA-driven initiative. So I just wanted to give you a very brief update and for the Equine Health Surveillance Network under CAS. And I just wanted to say that I'm so very happy to have you people engaged in CAS, because I think this group has been so instrumental in really moving things forward. with things like the stakeholder maps. The stakeholder map that we developed for equine is now being developed for all the other species network groups, because people saw the equine one and they thought it was wonderful, so they all wanted it themselves. So we're working on those. We're also working on the notifiable diseases. This is another thing that this group has driven forward, that they wanted to have more information on, when people identify a disease of importance, cases that somehow we could let other people know within the equine network across Canada, so that they could put in place some biosecurity. So that process is going forward. We have a small working group that's getting together to develop how that's going to be reported on the CAS website. We've also added in there, it was raised at one of our directors' meetings for CAS that it would be useful to have emerging diseases there as well. So in addition to notifiable, and that's another initiative that will be expanded across to all species groups. And again, the equine group can take credit for initiating that process and for having the persistence to really move it through a lot of resistance and obstacles. So for CAS in general, we are, as you're probably aware, we are transitioning the coordination out of the CFIA into the National Farm Animal Health and Welfare Council. So that process is underway, and the council is applying for multi-year funding to support CAS and CAS initiatives over the next few years. So that process is well underway. We are looking at doing a couple more workshops this year. We'll be starting our planning for a shellfish workshop, because we want to, aquaculture is included within, we're including all animal species within the network of networks. And the other one, which might be of interest to you, is I think vector-borne disease. So we're going to be looking at moving forward on a workshop to see if there's interest in having a group that's specific to vector-borne disease. The other thing is the National Farm Animal Health and Welfare Council has also recognized the work that the Equine Network is doing. And as a result, they have invited the Equine Network to do a presentation at the council forum that will be held at the end of November. So we'll be working, I think Christy, has accepted to do that presentation. So we'll be working with Christy over the next month to put together a presentation on all the things that the group has accomplished. So I'm really interested to hear, Amy, your work on the network analysis. When I say here, I mean it because unfortunately I signed in late and I was not able to get onto the video part, but hopefully I'll be able to look at it in the recorded session later. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. Okay, so again, I'm going to open up the lines if there's any questions. *6 to unmute for any of our speakers. And yeah, just to make a note, the National Farmed Animal Health and Welfare Council Forum is taking place at the end of November, and it is free to attend. And it's excellent if anybody is interested in attending. Just Google the National Farmed Animal Health and Welfare Council. And you can register to attend. It's a great meeting. Certainly good to link in with different parts of agriculture. And certainly it'll also be great to hear from, to kind of talk about it'd be good to have some representatives there to talk about, to support Christy as she presents to all of agriculture about the work that the Equine Network has been doing with CAS. Christy, did you Oh, it's we've just had a comment. Video presentations were excellent. Voice and slide not quite synced in Andrea's presentation. Yeah, so we had some. Andrea wasn't necessarily. She wasn't able to log in, so we were advancing the slides slightly lagged from her. If there are any other questions, feel free to ask them, or you can also type them into the little box. Christy, did you want to give the update on the upcoming symposium that's taking place in Guelph?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so the University of Guelph's annual Equine Industry Symposium is happening Saturday, October 27th, 2018, from 9:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. in the Thurberrow building, room 1200 on the university campus. Everyone's invited to come out and engage in the community-wide discussion about prevalent issues within the equine industry. This year's theme is focusing on discussing solutions pertaining to professionalism and industry-wide standards for equine welfare. Symposium attendees can look forward to engaging conversations with veterinarians, researchers, fellow riders, and professional equine business people, facilitated by former CEO of Equine Canada, Akash Marar. The goal of this event is to further unite our community and develop practices that benefit the industry and, above all, the horse. Lunch will be provided and admission is free upon registration. The registration can be done through www.eventbrite.ca and search Equine Industry Symposium, or you can go directly to that link on the Equine Guelph website. So that is always a good event to attend, and especially there's a variety of people there that can provide good resources on what's going on and where the equine industry is headed.
Okay, perfect. The other person that I think was maybe going to join in was Jackie from Equine Guelph. Did I hear that? I'm not sure if Jackie joined the line. *6 to unmute yourself, Jackie.
Yes, hi. It's actually Susan Raymond. Jackie's Jackie's unfortunately homesick, but it's I was able to join in.
Excellent. So go ahead with your update from Equine Guelph. Welcome and thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having us. Yes, I wanted to let everybody know on our horse portal site, our short course on biosecurity, so it's sickness prevention in horses, is beginning in October 15th. It's a 2-week course, and we have Dr. Alison Moore as our guest expert. And it is a 2-week online course, October 15th, 26th, geared towards horse owners. And we focus on a lot of very practical information for horse owners in terms of reducing the risk of infectious disease.
And sorry, you said you can sign up on the horse portal, is that right?
Yes, sorry, it's on, so you can either go to Equine Guelph's website, so it's equineguelph.ca, or you can go directly to the horse portal, so it's thehorseportal.ca, and you'll see a range of different courses. This course, Sickness Prevention in Horses, you'll find a link to it, but as I said, it starts October 15th, and it's a 2-week course.
Excellent, thank you very much. So again, I'm going to open up the lines again if anybody else would like to, if anyone else would like to ask any questions. We do also, if you have something of interest that you may wish to share with the network or with the call, feel free to email Christy House at khouse@equestrian.ca. We do ask you put in your request to be on the call about a week in advance so that we can make sure you're on the agenda, and preferably a bit sooner than 1 week in advance, but a week minimum so that we can make sure that you do go out on the official agenda. And we're very pleased to promote and also to share any information that might be of interest to the equestrian community in Canada. *6 to unmute, and I'll just leave the line open for a couple more minutes while we, if there's any other questions.
Melanie, do you want me to do a quick code review update?
Oh, sure, yes.
Okay, there's not much to report on at this point. Besides that, the working group has gotten together twice so far, most recently last week. So for those of you who are not familiar with the code review process, the 5-year review, As part of the code maintenance process, each individual code has to go through a 5-year review summary, and that's NFAC provides a template that outlines the different areas of research or different areas that were seen as incomplete or needed more information during the code development process. And it's an assessment to see if there has been any new research since that point that requires the code to be updated or amended. So we have collected most of the information, and it's been plugged into the template, and we're just waiting final review from the technical panel and approval of the recommendation. The unofficial findings at this point is there are some areas lacking education that could be updated, and some new research in some different husbandry practice areas that we are recommending we take a look at. But again, we're still waiting for final approval from the Code Technical Committee, and it'll be submitted to NFAC hopefully by the end of this week, and I will be making a presentation on the findings to the NFAC Board of Directors at their December meeting. So on the January call, we would have more of an update of how that process is going to proceed. And I'm happy to take any questions on that process as well.
Okay, super. So one final call for any questions. *6 to unmute yourself if you wish to ask. Okay, very quiet line